Hello everybody, my name's Paul, also known as Pandaemonium Miniatures, and this is my very first YouTube video, step-by-step guide in how I went about making this piece of scatter terrain using ultraviolet resin. So a lot of you will have seen the Green Stuff World adverts, videos explaining how marvellous the product is, and it's very versatile. It's an existing product which a few manufacturers make, and it's primarily for the jewellery making market. So jewellery makers will cast pendants from this stuff and then attach chains to them, you know, earrings, that kind of thing. But it's been repurposed for us, tabletop crafters and wargamers. So I've made this for Frostgrave, and I'm going to take you through step by step exactly how I did it from start to finish. And I'll begin by telling you what's required. Okay, so let me just take this out of the way. So I've got UV resin. Now, as I say, Green Stuff World make this, and it, you know, this is virtually, I don't know that there's an awful lot of difference between products. I've got this one, I've got another brand as well, which I got from eBay, which it turned out was from China, so it took a while. This is a 200-gram bottle, and it was around about £10, which is pretty reasonable. I've been messing about with it quite a lot, and I think I've probably got about half a bottle left. Things to be aware of is what you need to activate the resin if you want it to work fast, is you need a source of ultraviolet light. So in my case, I got a small UV LED torch from Green Stuff World. There we go. And by shining this on the resin, it activates it. It causes a heat reaction, and you'll see that in a minute, I expect. The resin then sets in very little time at all, you know, maybe 10 seconds, if that. This means that you can actually sculpt things as you go. So as well as the crystals that I'm showing you now, I've also made things like icicles, where you just tease the resin out of the bottle, shining the light as you go, and it just sets as you pour it. I mean, it gets a little bit stuck in the bottle sometimes, but that's fine. Okay. So first of all, the base I've used simple MDF, about 5mm thick. This is 12 by 12. I've cut it to 6 by 12 centimeters, just simply by scoring it with a Stanley knife very carefully with a steel rule, and it cuts very easily and very cleanly. I've also used cork tile. In this case, these are coasters that I just got from the hardware shop, and you just break them into pieces and they form rocks. What I then did was, as you can see, I've mounted that rock, the cork, onto the MDF, and then I've coated it with Vallejo sandy paste, ground check texture, and that gives it a texture for the dry brushing to pick up on. Then the next thing I've done, I'll show you the one I did earlier, is I then gave it a coat of primer, just black primer, in my case Vallejo Surface Primer, just brushed on. What I did find, and what you will probably find, is because it's MDF and it's thin and it's absorbent, and the paint and glue shrinks as it dries, it does cause the board to bow a little bit, but that can be easily rectified. For a bigger piece, it's usually necessary to paint on the bottom of the board. For this, I simply just flexed it back to a straight shape again, and it seems to have stayed that way. I did that this morning. So next step I'm going to do is to dry brush progressive shades of lighter grey up until white onto this surface to create the sense that it's rock. So we know how to dry brush, don't we? I'm using a big flat brush, wiping off most of the paint and then brushing it fairly heavily across. Now, I'm not overly worried about this process simply because I want the general effect. Most of it is going to be covered in snow anyway, so any slight imperfections in the process won't matter too much. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of white to that. Go a little bit lighter with the brush. Like that, and then finally just pure white. A little bit of that. I'm just using primer for this, but any paints will do, I guess. It's just a bit more economical because they're in bigger bottles. Plop, 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 plop. Right, that'll do. So, it's looking all right. A few gaps there, but I can sort that out. Next thing I'm going to do is add a bit of detail to the base. So I'm using Army Painter Winter Frozen Tufts. And I'm just going to pop these on. Here and there. And then just for a little bit of extra interest, I'm going to add some flowers, I think. Again, these are Army Painter. There's yellow flowers. Just do one on each end, I think. Like that. Sometimes you need to add a bit of super glue, but most of the time I find just jabbing it a bit with a cocktail stick is enough to stick it down. Okay, so now we come to the bit that you were tuned in for, presumably. So these crystals, I've used molds like this one. These are silicone molds, various sizes and shapes, some quite massive, although I haven't actually gone the whole hog and used an entire mold because that would probably be all of, if not most of, a bottle in one go. So what I've done is I've tended to sort of fill the first maybe centimetre or so of the bottom just to create a base to start with. So I'll show you this resin in action. what I find and what you'll find is that you need to pour the resin in small amounts to begin with. It's no good trying to fill up the entire mould from the get-go, because the light won't penetrate all the way through. Even though it's transparent, the UV light won't get to the bottom. So it's best to do it in maybe 3 or 4 passes. So I'm shining the light onto the resin. I'm not sure if you're picking up, but the heat radiating from the resin is causing a little bit of steam to come out, and you get a certain amount of fumes, but it's not too bad. I've got the window open. A bit more. Yes, I think the camera's picking up the steam this time. You can probably see. So when you completely finish it, it will be reasonably hot to touch. So it's a good idea to just leave it a few seconds to cool before you take it out of the mould. Ordinarily, I'd have probably 4 or 5 moulds on the go at once, so I'd be doing this as a batch. And I'd have all of the moulds in a row very close to one another so that the light was catching them all. And then that just speeds the process up a little bit. One more little bit. I think that's probably full now. Okay, get that out of the way. So while that's just setting, I'll show you in advance. I've made quite a few more. So again, this was the bottom of one of those large moulds. Slight imperfections, but in honesty, as I'm intending to represent ice, I think it looks more naturalistic. If you wanted them to be actual crystals, probably just take a little bit more care than I have, I guess. So you can see, I think this is the shape that's going to be coming out of that mould. And then I've got smaller types as well. So all in all, including the one I've made, that's 9, which should probably be enough for this demonstration. Right, I think that's probably okay. So what I've been doing is keeping the light shining onto it as I take the mould out, just in case because sometimes on the edges it's still a little bit liquid, as you can see that is. So you can just cure the outside. This is just because I'm rushing, I think. When it's dry, when it's completely set, you do find that it's slightly tacky to the touch initially, but that will harden off completely given time. Just through exposure to sunlight. There we go. All right, so I've got my base, I've got my crystals. So what we then do is we want to attach everything to the base. and we just simply use more of the resin as a glue to set it all. And so if I place this at the bottom, just spread a bit of that on there. On the bottom, and some around the edges. And that's going to be plenty to hold it all in place. A small amount like that sets very, very quickly. Let's come back into camera a bit. Okay, so now I just start placing them as I feel. I am rushing. Good, okay, so I'm going to have this one sort of standing at an angle about here. So I'm just going to pop a bit of the resin there, shine the light on it. You can feel it start to take hold, so I can let go. And I'll pop another one just behind it. There we go. Maybe add a little bit more above it just to reinforce. It's just as well as getting a new piece of grey card anyway, because this is trash now. And then I think we'll have maybe these bits maybe a bit on top of here. Like that. And a taller one next to it, maybe a little bit behind. Slippery there. You can see it's so quick. Just smoosh that in. Feel as though we need to have some more this end. Maybe I'll have it the other way up for a bit of a change. Yeah, so it is as easy as it looks. It's actually easier than it looks. I'm just being a bit cack-handed about it. because I've got a camera right in front of me and it's hard to do all this at arm's length. It's going to need a little bit of reinforcing, I think. There we are. And one more in front, I guess, like that. Alright, so that's the basic idea. I think, yeah, I might add a few more. So I'm just going to pause the video a second while I do that, because I think you've got the principle for sure. So I'll just pause and then I'll add a few more and then we'll recap. Okay, so there we go. I've added a few more. I made 4 more crystals in the end, no 5, and I've added those, trying to create some kind of balance, but I don't want it too symmetrical. I want it to look a bit more like it's naturally occurred, I suppose. The other thing I've done is I've added a few of the citadel skulls as a bit of detail. So in order to match my other one, of course, it's going to need some snow. So what I've been doing for this is simply using Citadel's Valhalla Blizzard, for the simple reason that although it's a larger area and it does use up a fair bit of the blizzard, if I use snow flock, sort of blowing the excess flock off, it's likely to adhere itself to the crystals and you end up with fuzzy crystals, which is not what you want. Well, maybe you do. Who am I to judge? So yeah, so I'm going to use an old brush. It's all old brushes for this. Don't want to be too precious. And give it a bit of a shake. Get some up to the top. And just simply apply it fairly thickly. I don't have one of those Citadel texture spatula things. I just use old brushes. But you can see, you know, I suppose it's using up a fair amount, but it's not too bad really, and it's quick. So fairly splodgy. You can see I'm kind of combing it into the grass tufts a little bit. But I'm also leaving bare patches because the theme overall of my terrain is that there's been a recent thaw. So it's like, you know, that's why there's flowers. It's almost like the beginning of spring, which kind of makes sense with the lore of Frostgrave, because the city had been utterly inaccessible due to having been frozen over, and now it's visible again. Super quick this. So let's just turn it over. Do the end. Give it another shake. If you've used Valhalla Blizzard before, you'll probably have noticed it goes on looking fairly wet, but as it dries it becomes much more naturalistic. And if you kind of poke into it a little bit with your brush, you will create quite a nice texture which will be apparent once it's dried. I'm going to need another pot of this soon, but that's okay. For larger terrain pieces, I have been using snow flock, which I mix into a clear acrylic medium, and then I add in some glue, PVA glue, and I find that for a largest piece of terrain, such as the tower that I made recently, I only actually needed about 2 teaspoonfuls worth of snow flock in order to get the coverage I wanted. Oops. Yeah, it's easily wiped off, so that's good. Right, jobs are good. So there we are. That is basically the principle. I'll just get the original one I made, put them side by side. And you can see we're pretty much there. So I hope you enjoyed that. Like you can see, it's really a simple thing to do, but the end result is really effective, and I think I've only scratched the surface of the potential for this resin. So if you're interested, I'm PandaemoniumMinis. I'm a commission painter and terrain builder. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, and I've got an Etsy shop. I'm going to put all of those links below the video. If you liked it, please follow. I'm not entirely sure what other content I'm going to be producing, but we shall see. And if you've got any questions or queries, do please leave a comment or drop me a message on one of my pages. Okay, thank you very much.